Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Today's episode, I think, is going to be a relatable one for a lot of people. I want you to picture this. I want you to imagine that you are just scrolling through your social media feed and you notice that somebody you follow is away this weekend with a bunch of friends. And they're kind of posting in real time. And at this point, you're like checking in because you want to know where they're going and what they're doing. And if everyone had a good time or if something funny happened. Like you almost feel like you're there. Or maybe you have just crushed through your latest feel-good series. And at this point, you are so emotionally invested in the fictional characters and the friendships in this series that you're sad when you get to the last episode because you feel like your friendship hangout just ended. Or perhaps you're catching up with a friend or an acquaintance and they're telling you about a recent get-together or trip that they had. And you've asked so many questions that at this point, you kind of feel like you were there. And then it hits you. You're living vicariously through others because your own social life feels, well, a bit lacking. That's exactly what happened to our guest today, Christine. She found herself thinking, how come they're all living their life and I'm not? Now, granted, social media and TV shows often present an idealized version of reality, but that desire for genuine connection, that's real. In today's episode, we're diving deep into Christine's journey from feeling socially disconnected to building a vibrant community in her life. We talk about the excuses that we all make that are keeping us from forming the friendships we need and how Christine, in particular, overcame these excuses. We talk about why waiting and hoping and dreaming for connections to just magically appear is not the answer, and instead, how to take initiative to create the groups that we need in our life. And finally, we talk about the importance of staying open to unexpected friendships and the amazing places they can lead us in life. Now, my guest today is Christine Hetzel. Christine is the host of the Time for Brunch podcast and blog, where she coaches clients on prioritizing their own needs and personal development. A passionate advocate for community and in-person connections, Christine has organized thriving meetup groups across multiple countries with hundreds of members. She believes that strong friendships are crucial for mental health and well-being. Drawing from her experience in both the corporate and nonprofit worlds, Christine now dedicates herself to helping individuals make time for themselves while developing physical, mental, and emotional strength through movement and authentic connections. I am thrilled to share my conversation with Christine to you. So with that, let's get into today's episode. Hi, Christine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Alex. I am so excited to be here. I am such a fan of the work that you're doing that I feel like I'm going to work really hard not fangirling this entire time that we're chatting.
Oh, that's so kind. People say things like that. And I still have this moment where I'm like, wow, people listen to this like in their own lives all over the world. I mean, I can see that people listen to it, but I just feel like I'm me in my office talking to my microphone. So that's
But you're
so
not.
kind. Great
You're in
reminder.
such incredible work that I think more than ever we need to hear. So again, super excited to be chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be chatting with you. I think I've had a string of podcast guests recently where I say, like they're doing the thing, because so many people, I get it. I do this too in other areas of life, right? You want all the resources and all the answers and to research all the scenarios. And so much of friendship community is just
Doing
doing the thing.
Yeah.
And trying it out and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and like taking action, small action. So I love when I have somebody who is doing the thing on here, because you can give people so many real life examples of what's worked for you and how they might approach that in their own life.
Yeah, I do feel like I am very action oriented at this point in my life, but I wasn't always. I would have definitely have considered myself growing up more of a wallflower, very studious and a bit of a bookworm with maybe a little extrovert hiding behind it all that wasn't quite sure how to come out because my mother was so extroverted. So I was kind of just in the shadows watching. And I remember thinking she could become friends with a pet rock. Like this woman can just chat with anyone in any situation. And I had a lot of admiration, but a little bit of envy because it did not come natural to me at all.
At what point do you feel like that shifted? Was it slow? Was there like a moment where you're just like, I can't keep waiting for this to happen to me?
Yeah, I remember there's two pivotal times that I specifically remember. One was I think I was having my first quarter life crisis, and I was literally felt comatose on the living room sofa. I even actually remember the texture of the fabric of the sofa where I was like, this is not the life that I wanted. I'm not living like this full experience. There's just so much where I feel like my life has been very limited and small. And I remember feeling a deep sorrow, and a lot of it was lacking in connection. So I think from there, I started to really consider what am I doing, and feeling a bit more of, I have to make some big changes. It didn't happen though right away. So that happened around 25. It wasn't until my 29th birthday that I really started to be like, this isn't working for me. I really have to make that change because I feel like my life has become very routine in a bad way. I go to work, I come home, at that point, I was watching Friends that was super popular, ironic, and thinking, wait, how come they're living their lives and I'm not? And granted, I know it was a sitcom, but still I wanted that connection. So that was really pivotal for me. Like, I'm going to go into my 30s and I don't have anyone that I feel I could really call a friend, and I'm not living the life that I feel like I should be living.
You said the thing about Friends. I talk a lot about how our friendships aren't going to look like sitcoms and TV and movies and whatever. But what the movies and TV are doing is smart, because they're putting this out there and we crave it.
Right.
So some people leave the couch, leave their living room, and they go build what they want. Other people just keep watching it because it is what they crave. And that's like a difference is I'm either going to go do this for myself, or I'm going to keep watching and wishing I had this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit more of like that speaks to our nature, where sometimes we may be okay kind of looking outside in and being more of a voyeur. And for me, that left me feeling a bit empty. But of course, yes, I understand why they do that. There is that sense of longing, and that will make you crave wanting to see it again, because you feel like you're connecting with your friends whenever you do tune in. Or I think Traveling Sisterhood Pants, I can't remember the name of that movie, was pretty pivotal, or all those different things where it just kind of connected. And I thought there has to be a way to make this happen in my everyday life.
I talked about this a little bit in the last episode. So if you want to dive deeper into what I'm about to talk about, go back and listen to episode 91. But if you ever find yourself envious of what you're watching, whether that is TV, social media, or maybe it's not even what you're watching, it's just what you're hearing. It's a conversation where somebody's telling you about a friendship scenario, some sort of gathering. I think a lot of people, if they find themselves envious, just take that scenario at surface level. So if somebody is telling them, let's say, about a big group trip where they went on this trip with like 20 people, or that's what you're seeing on somebody's social media feed, I think a lot of people just think like, oh, I'm envious of a really big group trip. And maybe that is what you are longing for. But what I talk about in episode 91, and I'm going to mention here, is that you might just want to consider, like, is it actually a feeling that you are longing for or envious of? So that would mean that when you're watching somebody's, let's say, Instagram stories about this big group trip they went on, you might be envious of that feeling of like the big group family hangout type thing. That might be it. Or you might be envious of the way that everyone just seems so casual. Like everyone's just hanging out in the living room of the Airbnb in their sweatpants. Or maybe what you're longing is the feeling of the spontaneity that you're seeing in these posts where people are just deciding at the last minute, like, yeah, let's hop in a cab and go across town and try out that new restaurant. And like, let's go do these things. We didn't really plan them. Like maybe it's the feeling of spontaneity. Maybe you're watching these things and everybody's laughing about a silly mistake somebody made, like one of the people drove 30 minutes in the wrong direction. And what you are longing is that feeling of closeness where you can make a mistake and drive 30 minutes the wrong way. And instead of people getting mad at you, they just brush it off. And it's like now kind of a joke. This is all to say, it might be the actual situation that you're envious of, or it might be the feeling. And I think it's worth exploring that because let's say it's the big group trip with 20 people. You're like, oh, well, I can't ever make that happen. Or that's a lot of work, or I don't have enough friends, or I can't afford that, whatever it is. But it also might just be the feeling. And if it's that feeling of spontaneity, you can probably make that happen right here at home by just trying to call up some friends and see if they can do some things last minute. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's worth exploring because it might be a lot more accessible than you originally thought. Well, I was going to say, do you think that at that point, when you did have this longing, was life overall like good? And I'm asking that for a reason.
Yeah.
The reason is I tell people sometimes, the messages out there are go build this for yourself. To be successful, you have to do these things, like do it on your own is somehow better. But I think what people find is when you do tap into community and friendships, it's like I call it an amplifier. Like everything that's going well just feels even better. And I think that's because you get to share it with other people around you.
I love that. So were things going well? Yes and no. First world problems, right?
Yeah.
Like, in all actuality, the fact that we're even having the privilege to sit here and afford the opportunities to kind of have that lens of looking back to that time means that my world wasn't that horrible. So yes, it was okay. I had all of my needs taken care of. I was pretty in a stable career and a stable marriage. But I think, was it good? I would say that if I was talking to myself back then, right then and there, I would say, listen to that little longing in your heart because life can be so much better. And that's really what it comes down to. And I agree, there is the amplification of having people to celebrate life or even to share when it's not great has been absolutely pivotal.
Yeah, to hold you.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to 29. You're at a breaking point. You have this longing.
Yeah.
What do?
I make excuses. I do. I start looking at all the reasons why it's impossible for me to make friends. I don't work in a field where I have interactions with a lot of people, and a lot of people make their friends at work. So I can't do that. At the time, I was working in the psych field, and there's a really big confidentiality issue. And so I can't go out into like the regular public and maybe come across our patients and feel myself, and I can't be free. I don't have children. Everybody else that has friends is because they're a mom and they met their friends that way. Let me see. I'm sure I had a few more excuses. Those are the top two I think that I utilized very frequently. And I think that somewhere, somehow, enough is enough. And I think we'll hear that in anybody's story whenever you just figure you have to make a change. So it was like, okay, I can say that, yes, in my world and what I'm seeing, I have created this kind of lens where everybody else has these great opportunities of making friends. That's not my reality. How can I work with my reality currently?
I mean, that experience is very common. The excuses are plentiful out there.
Mm-hmm. It's not that they're not valid. I'm not by any means not saying that's not like, yeah, it was true. But was that sufficient reason for me not to actually go out there and pursue something more? So I use the internet. And I love the fact that the podcast is called IRL because, yes, I feel that the in real life connection is pivotal. But I did use the internet to help me in terms of how do I connect with people.
Well, IRL doesn't necessarily mean you and I standing in a room together. Like we're both experiencing our connection right now in our own life. That's, I guess, more where I'm going with IRL is that you can build this however you want, but what you are building, what I'm building is different, again, than us sitting on the couch watching a sitcom, experiencing
vicariously through this fictional character.
Yeah.
No, and I know that you've had episodes on that. For the record, Marco Polo, for me, I know you had an episode of somebody with Marco Polo, but I will say that Marco Polo probably saved my friendships during the pandemic and my mental health because I had the outlet, and we still use it to this day. So I do understand what you're saying. I felt like for me, though, at that time, I still wanted more of what maybe was perceived of a traditional friendship where you would meet up with people. So I think I Googled at that time, and I think they were giving away lottery winnings every time you Googled. I don't think I won, but I did win in friendships. So I Googled and came across something called meetup.com. And I was like, I don't really know what this is, but it's kind of exactly what I want. I want to meet up with people, and how do I make that happen? So I started what I thought would be a really niche kind of, again, because I had used excuses that everybody had kids, which was a meetup for people that were already in relationships, whatever that may be, but didn't have children, who wanted to potentially have a bit more freedom with getting to meet other people. So I think my very first meetup may have been at a bowling alley. And I had a lot of people RSVP, and it was exciting and scary all at once. And then I realized, like, oh, there's something to this. There's more people who are longing for this exact same type of connection. So how do I keep it going? And keep it going, I did. I luckily met some of my closest friends through it, and we grew it to where it was very robust. We had over 500 couples at one point. We had meetups several times throughout the week in different kind of anything from art galleries to microbreweries or bicycling through the trails, whatever the case may be. So kind of a little something for everybody. And of course, it grew past the fact that there were couples that had children, but still wanted to get out and make friends that were other couples. So it did become pretty pivotal. And I think that's when I started to realize, okay, everybody's in the same shoes.
Yeah.
Like they all have the same justifications or excuses for not making friends, but we're all craving it. So I just have to put myself out there. And that's really kind of, it came back to like round circle to my mom, who would literally just strike up a conversation with anyone and walk away with a friend. It kind of happened in that way. So I felt much more comfortable. And again, thinking back to your episode, like the liking gap, that's such a really important piece for people to know. Because I always say when I'm working with my clients, like, you're worried that they're judging you, and they're literally just thinking, did I take out the chicken in time to defrost it for tonight's dinner, or whatever the case may be? Self-acceptance has been key, but also being able to not come from a place of taking things personally has been really pivotal as well.
Okay, so let's go there a little bit more. When you say that, because where I was going to go before you said that was, so often we talk about finding friends or joining a group. And I think there's a lot of power in creating what you wish there was. Now, sure, if you can go and find the exact thing you want, great. But if you're like, oh, that doesn't meet at a time that works for me, it's not quite the group I'm looking for. There's a little bit of work to creating things. There's also, when you create something, you have to kind of let go of that personal piece. Like if they can't make it, that's not because of you, that's because of their life. So when you talk about letting go of the personal side, do you want to talk a little bit more
Oh my gosh,
like ways you've done that?
I'm so glad you said that, because I remember we actually ended up having to institute a no-show policy that I was always very lenient about. But it came to, if we had a specific event where it was like a ticketed event that people didn't show up to and we were holding or reserving or whatever the case may be, it became more of an issue for those type of events. But I tended to not personalize things, where some of my co-hosts of that specific group, because we did grow quite large, maybe were a little bit more personally offended. They felt like it was a disrespect of their time, or the fact that the RSVP wasn't changed in time. I think I let it go because I started to see, and maybe this is because of my own personal life, I ended up being in a caregiving role for my father, who had a pretty debilitating stroke. And I saw how valuable it was to have friendships around me to help buoy me through that really difficult time in life. So I started to see that, hey, sometimes I've had to quote unquote flake out on my friendships too. I mean, I'm in the middle of trying to figure out, is the insurance going to pay for rehab for my dad? That means I may forget to change my RSVP for whatever that event may be. So I think that having that personal experience allowed me to come from a place of acceptance or forgiveness that people could be busy. I have also, again, working in the psychology field, I know that it can be paralyzing. It can be very anxiety provoking to meet up in a new place with a new time with new people.
Yeah, I think when you're the creator, when you're holding the space, let's use that, right? You have done some of that legwork to initiate this gathering. It is work. And it's often work that societally we really don't appreciate until we have to do it.
I say that all the time with my partner currently. I say, whenever we go out and he has a fabulous time, I'm like, it took a lot of work to have a lot of fun. But yes, so one of the ways that I would always think of when I had an event, and if I was hosting and I saw that there was a new face that was going to be coming, I would personally always reach out to this person several times before the event came up, because you know that it can be a little scary and overwhelming for them. I allowed myself to put in the work because I knew that it would pay off. And while at that point in time, it could say that I could have decided to just close things down because I had the friends that I needed or could continue to really give of myself in time, I also knew that we had new members coming in constantly who needed that as well. So there seemed to be almost like graduating classes, if you will, where we'd have like an incoming freshman group of people who would end up having their friend group. So it was great to kind of pass the torch along. And for me, at where I was at that point in my life, it was really important for me to continue fostering, even if it was work. It was something I was willing to do because the payoff was just so great.
I just want to drop in here and say something about hosting and gathering as labor. I could record a whole episode on this. I will not. This is going to be very brief. But what I want to say is, as somebody who was an event planner for over a decade, I am very, very well aware of how much work hosting and gathering is. That's why some people would pay me, right? I know a lot of people get really frustrated about being, right, like the person who's always planning the party, the person who's always hosting, the person who's always getting people together, right? Because it's work. It is work. It is a form of unpaid labor for the most part, unless you're an event planner, in which case, honestly, still don't make enough money. But that's a whole nother thing, okay? I think a lot of people's answer to this struggle is, I just don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do it, right? And if nobody's willing to do the work, the unpaid labor to get people together, we have less gatherings, we have less connection. So I don't think the answer is to try and get it off your plate if you're the person doing this. I think the answer is to try and build more appreciation for it amongst your friends. I have done this with many friends. And the reason I think that this is the answer is because, one, people start to see and appreciate the work you're doing. Like they acknowledge it. So it's not invisible anymore. 2, because they see how much work it is, they do start to realize like, oh, I haven't put in that work, or I haven't put in maybe some sort of other friendship work. Like maybe they are not the people who host, but maybe they are the people who stay in contact, or they are the connectors. Maybe they do something else, but they would then appreciate the work you do hosting, and you can appreciate the work they do as connectors, and everybody can work in their own roles to put in that labor into these friendships to keep them alive and well and nurtured and expanding. Let me know if you want me to do a longer, bigger episode on this, but hopefully that's something for you to noodle on. There's something to be said, in the beginning when people feel like this intense need for friendship. I think a lot of people walk around, being like, are you my new friend? Are you my new friend? Are you my new friend? And it's so much about finding what you need. And I get that, right? Because I really do think this is a foundational need and you're trying to fill your own bucket. I do think a lot of people, when they feel good in their social wellness, when it feels solid, exactly what you were saying, where suddenly, because the need isn't so great, you walk into the room and it's like, okay, well, there could be people in here that are for me, or I could just be, people's friend wingman.
Yeah.
I could be the reason they meet each other. And my connection with them could be so loose, but I don't really care because I'm happy they met each other.
A friendship matchmaker, a little bit, is what I've been called. I've been hearkened to Charlotte, but instead of trying to marry you off with somebody, I'm trying to get you to find like your bestie. So currently with my run group, if I meet like one person who has a lot in common with somebody else that I've run with, let's say on Wednesday, I'm like, you have to come to Saturday's long run because this person will be here and you guys have so much in common. So it is very freeing and exciting to be able to be the catalyst for others as well, while still getting my cup filled. Because let's not by any stretch of imagination say that I'm doing this out of clearly like esoteric, selfless reasons and I want the world to be a so much better place. There's a lot of love and joy that I gain from connecting others as well. So it is purely selfish because I do want the world to be a happier place. And I think friendship does help for that. I think at the core of it, as you've mentioned, it does come down to doing it. And then knowing that you're going to evolve and that group that you may have had may change. People will kind of come in and out of your life. So I think not allowing yourself to grow stagnant in your friendships is really important as well.
Yeah. I think just being open, like in the beginning, when you have that great need, I think you're really just looking for, things that will fill it. The more your cup is full, you're I feel like when I go into things, I'm excited for the surprises. Like I'm excited in a big group of people just to even have the simplest of connections to them because they're probably great people. Maybe it'll develop into something more. I don't hold too tightly to that. And I just remain open to like, I might get in a conversation with someone, even about a topic I didn't even know I was interested in. And suddenly I want to spend more time with them because like, whoa, I've never talked to anybody who is interested in that. And like, I'm kind of curious.
Right.
I might talk to other people about something and be like, oh, well, that's really interesting, but I don't really feel any need to explore that for hours on end. And then, open to the possibility that 3 weeks later, I'm going to meet somebody who has a similar interest. And then like you were saying, it's like, wait, I need to connect you two.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about some of like the most incredible transformative books when it comes to like sales and marketing and business development have to do with exactly that concept is allowing yourself to broaden your network, not necessarily from a place of looking at you're going to close a deal every single time, but you're going to widen your group of possibilities is basically what it comes down to. So if you look at it from a friendship standpoint, it's pretty much the same thing. I think too, letting go of why I jokingly said this person's going to be your bestie. I think letting go of that title of thinking that everyone is going to be this, I don't know, your Gilmore Girl version of your bestie or your Sex and the City Charlotte, whatever the case may be, and just realizing that that's not necessarily needed.
Yeah. This like peak version of friendship that we have somehow that
like you're going to finish my sentences.
Yeah. Isn't like, is really romanticized And there can be beauty in that kind of friendship. If you have that, great, but it's not the end all be all. It's not the only fulfilling friendship. There are so many other versions. And honestly, the thing we're not talking about is if you have that kind of friendship, it is very similar to like a romantic relationship in the amount of work it takes. And for some people, that may not
be feasible
right now in this season of life. You may not even want that. Like everybody's different, and that's what we're not saying.
Right.
So who cares? Find what feels good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of that. I love the fact that you talked about kind of opening up the conversation with people and not even realizing what we were interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's part of being able to explore friendships, but not as a friendship, but as just being truly, genuinely excited to hear what makes people excited about their lives and passionate about their lives. So I think about a little bit, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, there was a movement. It was started by a nonprofit where the entire purpose of it was I talk to strangers, and kind of like on the heels of don't talk to strangers, because we all grew up with that kind of mentality. And I loved that movement because it basically allowed you to strike up a conversation while you're waiting in line for your coffee at the Starbucks. And it doesn't mean you're going to walk away with a bestie. It may mean you ever see this person ever again. But it allows you to start practicing the conversational pieces that you'll need for when you are in the right situation to be able to actually make those connections for friendship.
When you meet new people, I think you can go about it a couple ways. Like your mindset going in. It's like, okay, well, are they interesting to me? Do they serve me? Do they connect with me? Is there a similarity? Like you're trying to find something similar.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that route. I think that's what a lot of people take. At this point, my mindset when I meet most people is actually to just be as curious as possible about what lights them up.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to connect with me at all, not even a little bit. It might, and we might have other similarities. And like the story that is coming to mind is we met up, we had dinner with a coworker of my husband's. And so her and her husband, like we had them over for dinner. We had met her husband in passing a couple times, but we didn't know him very well. And I think he's like a pretty quiet guy. Probably was not that stoked about having to come over and have dinner with these people he's only met a couple times. We spent the majority of the evening talking to him about his metal band. Like I grew up listening, I guess, to some metal because my dad listened to it, but it's not something I keep up with. It's not something I know a ton about. But he was telling us about like all these instruments he's using and where he's playing and certain concerts they went to. And they were so lit up the entire time talking about it. I couldn't even tell you most of the things we did talk about, but I do vividly remember how engaged in the conversation we all were, which is just fueled off how passionate they were about something that is not high on my list.
You mean you're not going to like become a groupie anytime soon and follow them on tour?
No, probably not, because it's not my favorite type of music, but they were so enthralled in it that it made for like such a lively conversation.
Yeah. So anytime that somebody lights up, as you said, that allows you to feed off the energy. And where that natural proclivity to maybe want to steer the conversation to where we could deem a safe space. Like, I practice this and we're not talking about the things I practice. Why are we not doing that? Just letting it organically flow into what excites them. Because while you don't connect about metal specifically, I'm sure you're passionate about whatever genre of music you love. And even if it becomes a healthy debate between the two of you, it still is fun to have that kind of a conversation. And it could be, that's just a fabulous example, but it definitely does span that in terms of, I think it turns around instead of what does this person bring for me? What can I learn from the person? And if you look at it from the perspective of every interaction we have is a wonderful opportunity to like learn something. I think that allows the conversation to really, truly just get up and run, and you just follow it wherever it goes.
Learn something, but what came to mind there was also like, just allow this person to be themselves, right? There's something about feeling seen that, again, I couldn't tell you a lot of things about that conversation, but what I can tell you is everybody in that conversation felt seen.
Yes.
And that feeling is really powerful.
that may be more foundational than our need for friendship. It's belonging or being accepted of who we are so that we feel like we belong. So maybe you guys don't belong in the same category of your fanness of music, but this individual was able to feel like he belongs there with you because you're able to listen to him talk ad nauseum about what he loves.
Really passionate about.
Yeah. I think it's also really important that if you are having difficulties and finding something to talk about or to connect with, that you go and chase after the things that you actually really just enjoy doing yourself. And then you get to have these conversations. For example, like if he was to join some kind of a Facebook group where it's like, I don't know, indie grunge metal bands from my garage, whatever the case may be, which the internet allows us to do now, likely he's going to be able to find that conversation that when they do meet up or whatever the case may be, he'll be like, oh yeah, did you hear this when I did this on the guitar? I'm talking way over my head because I definitely don't know anything about music in that regard. But I think that's part of it too. And I think that also helped me because while I had this initial interest of, I just want friends, it did start to kind of almost niche down like, well, what do I have in common with certain groups and how do I keep that going so that we can talk about things that light us on fire additionally? So for me, it turned into a couple of different little things. One of the rules that I had to, which is funny, talk about all the rules that we had. The only one that I really cared about the most was I asked folks that when they came to the meetup that they didn't just rest on the laurels of what they did for a living. Because it doesn't allow, like, you could probably tell me what you do all day long. And the fact is we even share a similar platform. But if I don't share that platform, I don't know what you're talking about. It's all Greek to me. It's just impossible. And it's not who we are. Like, yes, we do
I will
this.
die on that hill.
Okay.
That I'm with you. Like, stop asking people what they do for a living as a way to find out about them.
Oh my gosh. It was like, I didn't care if you didn't RSVP. You may have been in trouble with a co-host or two of mine if you didn't, but don't show up talking about like your Excel spreadsheet from work that's due tomorrow, because it does make things really difficult, not just because of not the conversation, but you're not even able to explore what lights you on fire. Clearly that doesn't. So why are we talking about it?
Yeah. My personal reason for that is, so before I had this podcast and this job and this platform and all these things that I do, I was a luxury wedding planner. And so people would ask me what I did, and I would say that I'm a wedding planner, and everyone has a wedding story. Everyone has, their wedding, their friend's wedding, that something went wrong, the most expensive wedding, everybody. And so people loved it because in a room full of strangers, they now could immediately talk to me for 1 hour about every wedding story they've ever experienced and what I would have done in the scenario. And I wanted to talk about anything but weddings, because the thing is, the job was fine, but I really wasn't passionate about it on that level. Like, I was good at it and it was interesting and fun, but I didn't really care. So I would just want to get out of these conversations.
And there's also the part of like, if you want to approach things in a way, instead of kind of like, I'm really big into affirmations. And one of the things that I think about with affirmations is think of the things we want to be, right? Not the things that we absolutely hate. Like, instead of saying, I want to not be able to run without losing my breath, I want to be able to run with feeling strong. Like, just flipping it around a little bit. When you leave it to work, you do end up starting to change the wording, the phrasing to where it does sound like a chore. And it doesn't sound, again, exciting for folks. So I'm with you.
Anything but work, people.
A book. Talk about something you saw on TikTok. I don't know, your favorite coffee order. Super curious
your
actually
favorite
about that.
Sea creature. Like, I don't care. Pick anything else.
I'm a Disney villains girl, so Ursula is definitely my favorite sea creature over here.
There you go. I'm not a Disney fan, but my husband is, and he would have heard you across the room and he would have walked on over and had a whole conversation about Disney villains. And there you go. You're running off.
Exactly. It is one of those really interesting things. So I think that's it, is like basically doing it, getting out of your head and allowing yourself to, one, be willing to either put in the work if it's something that really means a lot to you, but giving yourself a lot of grace that there's going to be times that you're going to probably spend 25 minutes berating yourself for not saying this one thing, but giving others grace too if they fumble, because we live in tough times and people are just doing their best. So that's pretty much it.
Also, all the things that somebody else is probably berating them for that you didn't even notice. And then give yourself that grace, because People probably didn't notice a lot of things that you thought were awful that you did.
Yeah.
Most people have no clue.
Mm-mm.
So at some point, we got to close up this episode, but I do want to hear, we talked about you started this group. What became of it? What was the outcome for you of doing that work and starting this group?
I got divorced. And it had nothing to do with the group. But the couples part wasn't quite as pivotal for me in my life at that point. And so again, allowing ourselves to evolve. I'm still friends with quite a people from that group, but evolving past that one common ground that we had where maybe we were not yet having children or we had already had children, or whatever that common ground that initially brought us together, and allowing it to evolve. So with one friend, we evolved into our love of hip hop music. And so anytime that we want to get together for like Sunday fun day to listen to, because we're also old at this point, I feel like, so we're not doing the clubs until 3:00 in the morning. So we dig like going out to like a Sunday afternoon hip hop kind of performance. So finding those kind of ways to go through. But my next, I guess, friendship evolution really started in my passion for running. So was figuring out, and very similar to the meetup group, if I can't find something that works for me, how do I start it? And it literally was just that, like, hey, this is my network currently. Can you guys let me know if you have any friends that are looking to somebody to run with? Because I need more of that in my life.
Yes.
And that just evolved in its own. I will say the connections I made through running for me, because I'm so passionate about it, but also because I feel like it's almost like, well, there's a lot of connection. There's now finding of running with people that become your friends, where you end up having these really tough discussions while you're doing like almost an EMDR type of like binaural type thing. So I think that's part of why it became so pivotal for my friendships as well. But again, just allowing myself to have a space of it evolves. I evolved. I've changed. And maybe those friendships are no longer quite as strong, but that's okay. And what can I do in my next group? And that sounds like, I feel like Ariana Grande, thank you next. That's not at all what I'm saying, but just being okay that they're not necessarily going to be where you're exchanging lockets and friendship bracelets and you're together like the Divine Sisters of the Yaya Hood or whatever. I'm thinking of all the movies, and that you're meeting together when you're 80. So that's been really it.
They're also still, even if they're not as present and everyday and like regular meetups as they were at one point, they're still in your network, and they are still people that in your next iteration, I don't know, let's say you have that one friend to do hip hop, but you decide 3 years from now, like, I want to hang out and listen to hip hop every week.
Yep.
And you never know, right? We're all dynamic people. So even though you connected with them in that original like child free group,
right,
that's not to say that they may not fit in the next iteration. Like, we never know. And just because you've moved on from that group also doesn't mean that if you really enjoyed certain friendships in that group, you can't work to find the common threads. But I think that's quite often what people don't think about is like, you put energy into creating the group. If something feels good, you can put energy into diving deeper into that friendship to find the new comfortable ways to spend time together. And a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about that, because what they're thinking about instead is like, oh, we never developed into that friendship locket friendship. So I guess it's just a season and I'll move on. It's like, do you want to know how we get the friendship locket friendships? If that's what you really want somebody, it's that you allow each other into a very broad spectrum of ways into your life in a lot of ways.
Unless if they're toxic, there's really no reason, in my personal opinion, to cut anyone out. Like, I literally still communicate, not frequently. We're not meeting up for lunches all the time, but I still communicate with my very first high school boyfriend, because it was a season in my life where I learned so much from that relationship. He's a great human being. Clearly, I liked him for a reason. We have zero in common now, but there's no reason for me at this point to have cut him off. He didn't cause me any pain or difficulty or anything of that sort. So I think that is such a beautiful thing, as well as being willing to, again, see while they may not be in your everyday life, maybe every year life, but there doesn't have to be like You don't have to hate them with any kind of passion or pull them out of that category where they could still be an acquaintance. And that might at some point develop back into a friendship.
You just never know. And like, that's okay. Just allow that possibility, and they may or may not.
I think that that's probably the most poignant thing exactly. And that sums up pretty much the entire, I guess, my 20 years of developing friendships has allow yourself the possibilities. If you don't, if you start pigeonholing yourself, if you start subtracting from your life versus allowing it to be an addition to your life, you're always going to feel a little longing and not that connection or sense of belonging that we're so much looking for.
I'm just going to let that sit with people. I think that is a perfect way to end this episode. Christine, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I think people are going to get so much out of it, and I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story.
Alex, keep doing this amazing work. Thank you so much.
If you just listened to this episode and you thought to yourself, okay, so I am living vicariously through other people's social lives, and I don't want to do that anymore. But how do I start to make those changes? Then I want to tell you that we have, at this point, I am just shy of 100 episodes of this podcast. And this entire podcast is about how we make an impact on our social lives. How we do it. Like, what are actual people doing? What are the actual actions? How are we putting ourselves out there? How are we saying hello, walking into the room, going to the gathering, following up? We talk about all that stuff. So go dig through the archives. And you know, Christine has obviously dug through the archives because she mentioned some of our other episodes. So many episodes were mentioned in today's episode. And I'm going to point them out. We're going to link them in the show notes, so go check them out. But she mentions the episode where we talk about how the Marco Polo app helped create a big bustling friend group. That's episode 24. She mentions the liking gap episode, which is all about how your brain is playing tricks on you. That is episode 41. She mentions in here about using the internet or Facebook groups to find and make friends. We talk about that in episode 44 and 48. You can go check both of those out. And there's even mention of how we navigate small talk, which I have an entire survival guide to small talk in episode 49. I hope that listening to Christine today was an inspiration to go and do the thing, because that is exactly what Christine did here today. You know, she said you can't sit around and magically hope that this all just happens in your life. You have to go take action. And it's never, ever too late to do that. So with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @itsAlexAlexander. Or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting, and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.